Well, good morning, everybody. So great to see all of you on this beautiful, thankful Thursday, as I always call it. I know some people are still, being admitted. So we want to go ahead and get started and honor those who are here. How about that? So blessed morning to you. I am Pastor Kelvin Sauls, and I serve as a director for interfaith communities. At Community Health Councils, we are committed to language justice. So there will be a globe that will appear at the bottom of your screen. Just go ahead and choose your language, English or Spanish, and then we should be good to go. It's good to see all of you here. Glad that you're able to join us today as we kick off a series of interactive, webinars under the title of Soulforce Alliance, and looking forward to our time together. I want to just start off by appreciating all of our co-sponsors as we continue to grow our time together. We want to appreciate Clergy for Black Lives, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Southern California. We also want to express our appreciation to the Muslim Public Affairs Council, as well as the Cecil Murray Center for Civic Engagement, and the Jewish Center for Justice, for their participation in our time together. And you will see several of our co-sponsors participate as panelists, as they will be accompanying us through this journey that we are on, at this particular moment. As I started sharing at the beginning, really our time together is to see how we can, in anticipation of the 30th anniversary of the Los Angeles uprising in 1992, really to begin to examine in so many ways what the role of the interfaith community can be, needs to be, as we look back at what happened, how far we've come, and where we're going, especially with the disruption of COVID-19 and how that has certainly impacted in so many ways a lot of our faith communities in general, but particularly, our churches, in well, around the world, but in particular here in, South Los Angeles. We will be utilizing our time together to see how it is that we can, in the first place, continue to analyze the drivers of disparity that we are experiencing in, Los Angeles. Secondly, we want to work on how we can organize, continue to organize, and mobilize, people power to see how we can disrupt and dismantle these drivers, and then to see how we can catalyze moral reimagination to see how we can make our way towards a thriving, a safer, a healthier, and of course, a more equitable, South Los Angeles. How can we begin to ask different questions, around it? So we'll be exploring this, in several webinars where we will really go deep into these drivers, really see where we are. And today we're going to kick it off with a very general conversation, and our subsequent webinars will really begin to zoom in. Our hope is at the end of this series, as we go into, the 30th anniversary of Community Health Councils and the commemoration of the Los Angeles, uprising, to see how we can, come out with a resource, a curriculum, if you will, to see how we can then continue to build the agency, of our faith leaders, as well as the capacity of our faith-based organizations and other organizations to be able to engage in, dismantling, disrupting, as well as those drivers of disparity, as well as, how to begin to reimagine, who we can be and what we can be about. So that's what we're going to be, really digging deep in, and to see how we can, make our way, through this and our work together. I wanted to, before I introduce our panelists, just lift up a biblical image, seeing that we are talking about, the faith community. We all are certainly aware of the parable of the Good Samaritan and what happened, on the Jericho Road. And we will be looking at how, South LA in so many ways has been on a Jericho Road. And it's clear that, systemic and institutionalized systems has facilitated a lot of victimization. And in so many ways, just like that Good Samaritan, the faith community and other, community-based organizations, react to that and respond to that, in terms of, in a compassionate way, around how do we, pick up, those who have been, affected by these systems. Well, what we want to do is kind of shift that narrative, as part of this series, and begin to ask ourselves, what else needs to happen on this Jericho Road? What are some of the proactive steps that can be taken to reimagine that Jericho Road, so that, there can be less, if not no, victimization? How is that road in so many ways, filled with potholes, such as these drivers of disparity, that always result, in, the victimization, of, BIPOC, in general, but particularly, Black and Brown communities in South Los Angeles. And so really to reimagine, if you will, a second chapter in, for that parable, as we move, towards the 30th anniversary. Because, as you and I know, we can only pick up, those who've been victimized, for so long. At some point, we need to begin to talk about, a reconstruction of the Jericho, Road systemically, institutionally, and as we, make our way, through this. And I'm excited and looking forward to those who will be joining us today, as panelists, as we dig deep in it. So I want to go ahead and just welcome our panelists for today. I want to welcome Dr. Michelle Burton. She's the Chief Strategy Officer here at Community, Health Councils. One of our leaders, and glad to be in partnership with her. Marta Arguello is the Executive Director, for Physicians for Social Responsibility, here in Los Angeles. It's part of a statewide, movement, and glad to be, working, with Marta in so many spaces and places. And then the Reverend Dr. James M. Thomas, who is the pastor of Living Word Community Church and a professor of public policy at California State University, here in Los Angeles, who was actually on the ground, back in '92. So I'm really, really appreciative of the three of them being here with us, and for their guidance and all of that. I'm going to ask each one of them quickly, just to, greet us. So Michelle, how are you? I know we've all been busy here, there, and everywhere. So quickly, about 30 seconds. Michelle, how are you? Marta and Reverend James, how are you guys doing? And then we're going to dig in with some questions.
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Honored to share space with everyone this morning. And thank you for joining us. And thank you, Pastor, for bringing us together.
Great, great, great.
Good morning, everybody. The same. Great to be in community with all of you, and looking forward to our conversation.
Great. Pastor James, I know you got your whole class here with us, so glad you're able to join us. Welcome, welcome. Yeah. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Glad to be in community with you all. So yes, my class is here.
Great. So why don't we get into this? I'm going to start with Marta because I know Marta PSR LA has been just like Community Health Council, an integral part, of what became known as South LA, is future. And I don't know, whether we're able to share that link, Alejandra, just to check in, on that. There is an awesome website called southlaisthefuture.org, where, we have, these drivers beautifully, described and positioned there. I'm going to encourage all of you to check out, this website, and they have identified the 4, drivers of disparity, as they've, made their way through it. I was glad to be a part of this, while I was at Home United Methodist Church. I'm going to read quickly all of these. So why don't you just stop at number 1 quickly. You'll see there one of the drivers, and we're in it right now with the Crenshaw Mall, gentrification, displacement, and homelessness. We know that that's a huge driver of disparity. Let's go to the second one quickly. We look at that second driver: poverty, disinvestment, and joblessness. And then the third one that was lifted up, Marta, through that work: policing, suppression, deportation, and mass incarceration. And then that fourth driver, of disparity, environmental racism. And this is, one I know, Marta, that you, the two of us have worked on, for a while in terms of that. But let me, having said that, Marta, let me, just, ask this first question, to you in terms of, as we make our way to the 30th anniversary, of the 1992 Los Angeles uprising, what would you say, what are the state, of, these drivers of disparity, because we've worked now on them since the 25th anniversary, which is when, we brought, several organizations and residents and communities together, around that. Just give us a sense, Marta, if you will, of what's the state, of these drivers of disparity.
I think that when we did this work, I don't think, well, we knew that we identified these 4 drivers because we were deeply rooted in the South Los Angeles community and that experience. And I think the events of the last 2 years have really highlighted how prescient this work was. So if you look at every single driver, if you start with driver number 1, mass incarceration, I'm sorry, gentrification, displacement, and homelessness.
Yeah.
In many ways, because we didn't act, and because the system is, I actually think the system is working the way it's supposed to. So what we see is a deepening of this crisis of gentrification, displacement, and homelessness, right? We did this work about 3 years ago, and we actually see this getting worse. We also see, the combining crisis of COVID and climate, and of our broken immigration system, and of our broken criminal justice system, continuing to put our communities in harm's way. And the cumulative effect of these is one of the things that we're really concerned about. So we're not doing better. We've actually are now in a crisis, given what we've gone through with COVID. And so the solutions that we find right now are, one, we need to find solutions that deal with the problem now and have a vision into in 10 years and 20 years, where do we need to be? Because these drivers of health disparity are cumulative, and they take generations to address, given if we stay within this current system of how it's organized. May I share my screen, actually? Anyway, we can keep going. The second driver, boy, this is not going to feel hopeful. If you can pull the second driver. Again, we continue to, you know, poverty continues to be a problem. It is only deepened with the COVID crisis, and joblessness is only deepened in Black and Indigenous and people of color community during COVID. So much of the work that many communities are doing to address these things have been challenged by, you know, one, we are in essential jobs. Our communities are in many essential jobs, but not receiving the pay that's commensurate with being an essential worker. So we saw, you know, fast food workers where they were exposed, and that, you know, McDonald's was often a source of contamination because of the working conditions, lack of PPE. And so we continue to face this. And now we're seeing investments. But what happens when you invest on existing structures of inequality? If you don't do it right, you actually deepen the inequality. And we're seeing that a lot in the world I work in, which is in the environmental justice world, where the state is generating lots of revenue from a cap and trade program, but the benefits, how they're accruing to communities, are not always in ways that actually allow us to stay in our communities and bring the climate benefits to our communities and prepare us for the oncoming deepening of the crisis. Am I going on too long? That I need to move on?
No, this is good, because we'll touch on each one of them. In fact, how we are working on structuring our series is really to get into these drivers of disparity, because you're right. You know, there's a lot of, you know, commissions, you know, that get formed after these uprisings that come with a lot of solutions, and then those solutions get abandoned, you know, because, you know, a lot of band-aids are being put on these, and we never get to the root causes, you know, of them. So we're going to be digging deep into, you know, all of these, you know, in subsequent, you know, webinars. But I think we get the point of what you are saying, that prior to the pandemic, we've had several epidemics, right? Social, political, you know, epidemics, health epidemics, you see, you know, and the pandemic has really just uncovered that, you know, and exacerbated, you know, all of that. And it's so essential, as you said, we have to get to the root causes, you know, of these. For not doing so, you know, is going to keep us in that perpetual cycle of just picking up victims, which is cool and good and all of that. But we're going to get to, you know, later on, how do we just move beyond charity, you know, around that. I want to bring Reverend Thomas, you know, in this. You know, you were, you know, on the ground, Reverend Thomas, during that time. We won't, you know, reveal your age, of course, but you were on the ground
I'm only 21.
as a young, you know, Turk, a young faith leader. You know, why don't you just tell us a little about, you know, share some light, if you will, on what role did the faith community play, you know, during the uprising, you know, and in the aftermath, you know, of recovery. You know, your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Pastor Sauls. And, you know, you need to know that I'm barely legal. So the reference to my age, I just want everybody to know that I'm barely legal. But I want to say that, you know, the faith community played a major role during the 1992 civil unrest. And what I don't understand is that why the faith community is not playing a major role in what is happening today. And as you know as well as I do, that I have received a great deal of criticism because of my role in Black Lives Matter from some segments of the faith community. You know, and you also know I could care less. But I think what is important to remember about 92 is that these were a group of churches and a group of ministers who had relationships with each other and had relationships within the community and felt vested in those communities where they served. And so it became quite easy for them to decide that they would do something better, decide that they would get involved. And so this was not the work for cowards. I mean, I remember when we were deployed from First AME and we were going out in the midst of the civil unrest. And so there were people from the church coming back bloody because they had in some way gotten involved in trying to stop some of the skirmishes that were happening in the street. And so there was a great deal of respect. One of the things that I recall, that a respect that was garnered for the leaders at that particular time. And one of the things that I remember most vividly is when Ted Koppel came to First AME, and he was talking to Chip Murray, and he tried to make a statement about the divide between the church and gangs, and that gangs were not welcome within the church. And I can't remember everything that he said, but I do remember saying that in less than 30 seconds, he had tore Ted Koppel a new one. And so this is the kind of leadership that was developed at that time, a leadership that was directly involved. And my hope is that today's church would do likewise, that they would understand that it is not okay to sacrifice young people on the altar of freedom. We have to get out there and jump on the altar with them if there's going to be a sacrifice. And so that's what I'm hoping, and that's why I appreciate you inviting me here today.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's and that's why I use that image of of the Good Samaritan because I think sometimes we distinguish between sanctuary and street, not knowing that sanctuary in many ways is street, and whether we want to admit it or not, sometimes a street is found in sanctuary, and especially for where we are right now and what's going on as it relates to sacred resistance and the work that we are involved in, not just here, but in so many other, parts. We'll get to that, some more. I want to bring in Michelle. Dr. Burton, next year we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of community health councils. This, of course, coincides with the 30th anniversary of commemorating the Los Angeles uprising. So that should tell us something around the pivotal role that community health councils has played in terms of its birth and its growth, and therefore its impact, in South Los Angeles, and especially, with that H in the word around health and how we define health at community, health councils. My question to you is, how would you, analyze the current state of these drivers of disparities, right? And maybe, talk a little bit about, strategies, that CHC is employing and deploying, towards, the disrupting, and the disruption, of these drivers of, disparity. Dr. Burton?
So when I think about the 30th anniversary of the 1992 LA riots, which I still refer to them as, although others call them uprisings. The reason I still call them riots is because, that's what they were. Folks, not everyone had an uprising has a little bit more strategy to it and planning and intention. And for us, the riots were an immediate reaction. They were a reaction to ongoing injustice. I lived in a community that at the time had one of the highest homicide rates in our area. I was very accustomed to just, the daily, information on who had died last night. And, when we got to the point of that level of civil unrest, it was for a reason. And so when I think about, organizations like community health councils that were born out of this civil unrest and these riots, I do reflect deeply on, my 25 plus years of activism, since that time, because that's when I really started my journey and recognizing that things were not going to change unless we were all a part of the solution. So where are we now? What are we doing? And so part of the reason that I am honored to be a part of community health councils and the visionary leadership with Veronica Flores and Sonia Vasquez and our numerous other team members like yourself, Pastor, is that we take the call to action of policy and systems change seriously. And in order for that to happen, we really have to be intentional about dismantling those systems. And that starts at the very, very basic level of even how we approach this work. The social sector has largely been a poverty management system. I say that because I've spent my entire career in the social sector and have been really disappointed with the fact that it is so commodified by capitalism. And even within our nonprofit sector, we are subject to being hyper competitive with each other, which is not any way for us to grow. And so what we're trying to do at CHC, as an example, is we have really leaned in, for lack of a better term, to our role as intermediary funders in our communities and as capacity strengtheners and builders in our community. And so we're working on bringing our community-based organizations in South LA together through the South LA Decides Incubator and Accelerator program, and fostering more collective strategies so that we can have collective impact. And so we see each other as what we are, which are neighbors and friends and collaborators, not these isolated institutions who are scrambling for the crumbs off the table of government or foundations, right? That's not working. That much we know, right? Because that's been the paradigm of paternalism and charity that we have been operating under for quite some time. And if we want more, we have to act differently. We have to work differently. We have to recognize when we are furthering a paternalistic and, sort of white supremacist paradigm unintentionally. That's the whole idea about understanding the subtlety and the pervasiveness of systemic isms, is recognizing that sadly, we too are conditioned, and we have to unlearn those practices and behaviors in order to truly transform our communities. And so that's our focus in our South LA Decides Incubator and Accelerator. That's our focus in advancing our Learning for Equity curriculum in partnership with academic institutions. It is all about dismantling systemic isms and obias, as I call them, not just within our institutions, but within ourselves.
Great. Thank you for that, because I think we want to get into and transition into the systems change piece. But I want to, Marta, I'm going to pull you in again. Any additional thoughts that you have in terms of just the ongoing analysis of these epidemics now exacerbated by the pandemic, that you have after listening to Michelle and hearing Reverend Thomas. Marta?
Many thoughts, and I Community Health Councils is a partner of ours, and we, I've also, I've been working in the nonprofit world since I was 15 and first became a youth organizer. And so she's right about having to change how we work and change everything, because the system is actually working the way it's designed. And many of us in the environmental justice movement are talking about what does it take to do this, a transformative economy, an economy based on caring, right? And in that economy, the work that our nonprofits do the work that teachers do, the work that healers do, the work that doulas do, that midwives do, that work would be elevated, and paid adequately so people can thrive. And I want to share a screenshot of some work we're doing around envisioning what this new economy looks like. So, this is where we are. These are the drivers, and they continue. And despite our best efforts, because as I said, the system works the way it's supposed to work. So what we're trying to do is really move towards a non-extractive economy. And a non-extractive economy doesn't just apply to mining, right? Or pulling oil out of the ground, which we're doing in our neighborhoods still in this day and age, but it's how we extract value out of people. And those of us who are in the nonprofit world know what that feels like when the work that we do as organizers, as advocates, as voices for communities is also not valued by, the sort of the nonprofit industrial complex, right? And how those things are given out. But what we have the power to do, and where we actually need the faith community, is in building the power to make the transformation that we need, right? How do we infuse the values of caring into our economy? So, and it really does, when we talk about South LA, we talk about restoring it from the soil to the soul, recognizing that our souls are impacted by this extractive economy that is forcing mass incarceration, that forces our system of immigration, that underlies the fact that our communities can be dumped on and we're sacrifice zones. So having this conversation is incredibly important, because right now is the time because we're seeing the backlash on the little progress that we're making. And so standing together as movements of faith are really important. And in Los Angeles, we're at a critical moment, right? Where the organizing that was born in South LA is actually shifting the conversations about policing. And we're about to get control over budgets, right? Because, budgets reflect what we value and how we're going to solve problems. And we've got big fights ahead of us. So I'll stop, because I want to get to the organizing. Like, how do we, stake out what the problem is, but know how to continue to work together to actually hold people accountable.
Pastor Sauls, can I
Yes.
ask, can I add something really quickly that I think is crucial that I think I may have left out?
Okay.
I think we also have to look at where we start. And what I mean by that is, my lecture today was on ancient African civilizations. And so one of the things that I think is important is, even as we look at the faith community, and the Black community in particular, we honestly do not know where we come from. We also don't have a full understanding of how we got where we are and the ways in which the plot has been orchestrated against us. And so I think it's extremely important that as we move forward, and I think this has been something that has been missing from the movement for social justice or civil rights up until this point, and I think that this is the role that Black Lives Matter is beginning to play, is we're now starting to understand that we were around almost 200,000 years with a civilization, with religion and language and all of those things that make for a thriving civilization. Almost 200,000 years before the first Europeans showed up. And so it's important that we understand that, and that be a starting point, because one of the issues that led to the fall of Black civilization, other than just colonizers coming in, was deals being cut with those who were in leadership, who opted more for self-interest than for community interest. And I think that is extremely important to remember as we begin to move forward in this movement for liberation. We have to accept the fact that often promotion comes with a certain sense of self-seeking and self-interest. And in all of our organizing, how can we make sure that that legacy or that tradition or that model doesn't continue?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're right about that. And I think you've answered, the question I was going to ask you, and it connects with what, two pieces Marta mentioned, which is one, that it is in a sense about the restoration of the soil and the soul. It's not, an accident that we're talking about Soulforce, right? And then also, Marta, I thought that image you shared was powerful because it touches on the whole piece of, resistance in general. But, for the faith community, really talk about that our resistance, it's a sacred resistance, right? And not to view it like that, Reverend Thomas, is just part of the strategic distortion, that's been taking place, as it relates to the manipulation of Christianity by a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, view that undergirds the ideology and the theology, of white supremacy. No doubt about that. But also, it's not just about sacred resistance, but it is about, moral reimagination, and I think that's, I want you to continue, responding just to this, and then I'm going to ask, to see, how we can connect that, Michelle, with what we are, what we envision to do in terms of our mobilizing and our organizing, of people power, right? To dismantle, these drivers, of disparity. So Reverend Thomas, in light of that, just, what's your sense about how do we reposition, right, the faith community? You say, or continue to reposition the faith community, because there has been some repositioning. We have to acknowledge, to really, connect, how we do our faith and practice our faith as an integral part of organizing, and mobilizing to dismantle the drivers of disparity and not, look for ways to be integrated in it or co-opted by it. Reverend James?
You're paying attention to my virtual backdrop. That is a picture of Christian patriarchs. And I say that because one of the things that we haven't done that we must do is we have to be willing to teach truth. What I mean by that is that as a faith tradition, we have to accept the fact that most of what we read about in scripture happened in Africa. At the ancient phrase, Africa, before it was conquered and named Africa, it was referred to as the land of the blacks or the Garden of Eden. And the reason that this is so utterly important in terms of how we keep from going for the okie doke, as you said, is that we have to understand that our collective voice as humanity is enough to perpetuate us into prosperity, that we don't have a need to be white adjacent. And by whiteness, I'm referring to those who have an insatiable desire for whiteness, i.e. white supremacy. I would refer to them as whiteaholics. We don't have a need for the identity politic to include not embracing who we are. And so moving forward, we have to put it back on the table. As the body of Christ, as the church, as people of faith, we cannot do or say what was said when I was talking with, I think he was the dean of the School of Theology at Azusa Pacific. And I mentioned that Jesus was of African descent, or he was Black. His response to me was that he was brown. And quite a response I would never have expected from a scholar, but nevertheless, that's what he said. And so the point is that when we talk about a liberatory model, it has to begin with freeing our mind, giving Black folks a chance to really reimagine or imagine who they really are and where they truly come from. And I think that is really important. And we can have a president and the pinnacle of achievement for Black people. But there's not a Black person on the planet that felt as if racism and white supremacy had been minimized as a result of his presidency.
Right. Mm-hmm. So thanks for that, Pastor Thomas. Appreciate it. You know, I want to bring in Michelle again. You know, back in the day, Michelle, we used to ask, what's going on, right? Well, the young people are still asking the same question, what's going on? And they're not just asking that question, but they're ready to be the answer to that question, you know, around that. So as we move into the 30th anniversary, you know, clearly we need to figure out a way of asking some new questions, right? As you know, we work on strategies, you know, towards systems change. You know, what questions do we need to ask to breach charity through racial justice towards equity in dismantling the drivers of disparity? Because remember what happened on the Jericho Road, it was good, it was very important, but in so many ways, you know, it could be looked at as just charity. And sometimes that's what a lot of people feel comfortable staying at instead of, you know, moving towards, you know, equity and what it takes, you know, to do that, you know, systemically.
Thank you, Pastor. And thank you, Martha and Reverend. It's inspiring and always comforting to be in these conversations with folks who understand the complexity of the work that we're doing. And, you know, the reason again that this initiative, you know, that you've started, Pastor, of the Soulforce Alliance, you know, I'm compelled to say, you know, again, looking at this 30 years, but also connecting the charity with the, you know, advancing policy and systems change, but coming back to the reality that, you know, this is about how do we connect that with our spiritual communities, right? How do we connect that for us? And in the Black community, you know, in particular, our religiosity, you know, our spirituality is so tightly bound with the problem of whiteness, with the problem of white supremacy. And that is why I think oftentimes when people have an opportunity to hear these discussions, it can be confusing, right? Almost feeling as if we're conflating things, right? I hear that a lot from people, which is, that's a separate issue, Michelle. We're not talking about that right now. And what they don't understand for us is it's not a separate issue, right? We can't just unwind these things from each other. I was deeply religious as a child. At 5 years old, I made my mother take me to church and she wanted nothing to do with it. She wanted nothing to do with organized religion. She would drop me off and pick me up, right? And as I got older, I remember being so disappointed over the years of understanding the role of church. And my undergraduate was in Pan-African Studies because I wanted to understand my community, and I certainly wasn't going to learn that in our public school systems. And in doing so, again, the complexity, the sorrow, you know, that I experienced in understanding and learning about, you know, who that facet of myself really was and where we came from and our journeys and experiences and our value, and just how we've been robbed of that. And so when we, again, talk about charity and advancing policy and systems change, I'm with you, you know, Reverend, when you talk about, you know, there has to be this almost reckoning of understanding the value and worth of us as a community. And it has everything to do for me with the Black and brown divide that we're experiencing in South LA. You know, there is so much pain, you know, within our communities, and so much of it is shared. But honestly, because of you know, slavery and white supremacy and our history as a people here, a very untold history, you know, not just here, but before here. It is so difficult for us to show up with each other in our spaces where we bring Black and brown together because of the hurt and the pain and the disinformation, and really understanding, you know, the battle for the Black community in South LA, you know, the battle against displacement and gentrification, because it is a disappearing of our community. And with the Brown community, there are absolutely these extremely valid, you know, concerns and fight to not be invisible as well. You know, I tend to focus on the undocumented community as much as I can, because that's who I grew up with. You know, I grew up with the undocumented community of folks who were here and completely invisible. You know, my friends, you know, who hit 18 and had no pathway towards anything after that. You know, and the pain that comes with being that invisible. You know, so there, and to me, that's where we connect, right? It's like, we get that. We understand together, collectively, what it feels like to be virtually invisible in America, you know, to the systems that we're trying to participate in, that we've been locked out of, to not being, you know, to have our efforts, our intellect, our history undervalued, you know, in a very Eurocentric educational system, a Eurocentric religious system, you know. So to me, it's also about, again, coming back to ourselves and how do we build bridges together and unlearn what we've all been taught about each other and about ourselves, so that we can work collectively, as Martha has pointed out, to fight these disparities. Because part of the issue is we don't fight them together. We plant a flag on what we think our issue is as a Black community or a Brown community, and we don't fight together. Lastly, I'll just say I really value a lot of the literature that has been put forth by Dr. Pastor and others around the richness of South LA, and how in South LA, the Black and Brown community are doing a lot of great things together, and that we are forging pathways. And I want us to focus more on that, because the reality is we aren't going to get through this without each other.
Yeah.
We have to do this together. And the more we focus on that, the more we accept it, the stronger we will be.
Yeah.
I
That
just
hope.
want to say,
Go ahead, Marta.
this is really important. So behind me is Los Angeles, the skyline, but this is Tongva land and Chumash land. So we are all standing on stolen land, right? And so the same atrocities that brought Black folks here decimated this land and removed the indigenous people. But for people like myself, right, who are part of the mestizaje, which is the way colonialism worked in Latin America was different. And so we're mixed race, but everything in our culture makes us deny our indigenous background, right? It is denied to us in many ways, from language to many ways. And so I think, you know, rooting our work in indigenous knowledge and of its relationship to the earth, both whether that's indigenous knowledge of the Americas, indigenous knowledge of Africa, it is a pathway for our own healing. And so I just really felt compelled to say that, because we forget, and we often forget, that South Los Angeles is home to one of the largest communities of indigenous people from all over the Americas, right? So it's not just speaking Spanish, it's understanding that within a marginalized community, they are also marginalized.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, you know, Marta, because I think so many ways, you know, that's why I was glad I was introduced to the term BIPOC, you know, because it's really an ongoing experiment or invitation, if you will, of inclusion, you know, and how do we, you know, really understand that the American experiment is an experiment to disconnect BIPOC from roots. Because once you're able to disconnect a person from their roots, or any tree from their roots, you can then begin to control, the quantity and the quality of its, of its fruits, you see, in terms of that. And I think that's part of just this, white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant experiment that has taken place even before 1690, right? And so I think to make these connections, and that's why I love how this website, is called South LA is the Future, because, of, what's being excavated around its richness, and the possibilities, that we have here. We have about 20 or so minutes left, and I do want to invite our participants to get in on the conversation now. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, so we can get that question to our panelists, or if you want to make a comment, we'll look at this as kind of creating a platform or space for a wisdom circle that's gathering here with a very, very intentional, progressive, and liberatory a disposition in how we want to analyze, mobilize, organize, and catalyze how we move forward towards a thriving, equitable, safer Los Angeles, especially utilizing these drivers of disparity as a as a point of departure around that. Marta, I see in the chat the link to a film, so I want to just point people to that. Please copy that and go check it out, if you will, in terms of. So please, put your questions, in the chat, and I have some team members watching the chat, and then we'll continue our time together. Marta, I want to stick with you, quickly. I know you already started talking about it, but really to try and, see as we continue, to work on this. This is a long-term commitment. I mean, we've got to be in this for the long haul. We didn't get you overnight. We won't get away from you overnight. It's a long haul commitment to disrupt and to dismantle these drivers of disparity. We've had some wins, the last, couple of years, and throughout, our history here, because we've always been a people of resistance and resilience, right? Lift up, just if you will, just some of the progress that we've made related to systems change in South, Los Angeles, and we'll kind of, get around to our other panelists around that as well. But do you want to just lift up some progress? And then we'll check the chat and bringing some questions and some other voices.
Yeah, I'm going to lift up the environmental justice ones, because many of the, I think much of what Black Lives Matter was able to do in people's budget, that's, we watched it and cheered it on and supported how we can, but we weren't the ones doing that work. So from the sidelines, amazing, right? It changed our organization. It allowed us to actually talk about systemic racism with physicians who were both physicians of color who were confronting it, but also their colleagues who were like, oh my goodness, right? Which we already knew, but it was a big discovery. I think one of the biggest victories is actually getting, and we still haven't gotten there, and we need all hands on deck to move the city of Los Angeles to declare oil a non-conforming land use. And we started with a demand of, can we just have a 2,500 foot setback? Can we just have that, right? We don't think you should be pulling oil out of the ground, but can we at least have what Houston has in protections? Because we didn't have that. But we were, because of the organizing and mobilizing of many different communities, and the faith community, it was really important to this, was we've been able to move the city to finally say, why are we doing this? If we're supposed to be a climate leader. So the city council and Mr. Krikorian put forward a motion, let's just declare all oil a non-conforming land use. That's a huge victory, because we went from a policy that would stop fracking, which isn't what was happening in our communities, but people just love saying the word, to a 2,500 foot setback to actually solving the problem that communities are facing with the extractive economy, which is keeping fossil fuels in the ground. Huge victory. Another huge victory was actually the creation of the Climate Mobilization Office in the city of Los Angeles, and the creation of a community commission to ensure that as we address climate, that our communities aren't left out or behind, because we are. And I'll stop there.
Great, great, great. I want to lift up Whitney's comment, around just always, making sure that we, don't separate between religious and other. I think that's very, very important. That's why, Whitney, I prefer to use the term sacred resistance because it's much more inclusive for me in terms of the spaces and places that we can connect. We certainly don't want to participate in this whole, a movement of otherization, around it. So your point is well taken, Whitney. I want to bring in, Pat, Parker. I see you have your hand raised. So just, briefly comment or question, and then, following that, Pastor Douglas, Nelson from True Zion. Pat.
Good morning, and thank you for making this space and allowing me to participate. I want to thank everyone for their contributions, and I'd like to add briefly to the discourse. I'm Pat Parker with Sentinel Youth Services, and there I'm the lead for Schools and Community Partnership. And as I was listening to the conversation, what became apparent for me as we begin to talk about coalescing and moving forward is how to do that. I think that was one of the comments and the threads that was mentioned. And so I'm thinking that what has to be foundational for any collective is the data. It must be the driving force for whatever we do. And so as we begin to gather around disparities and equity, what does the data say? And of course, we know that the data says that the highest disparities are amongst Black people. We are talking about education. We are talking about the criminal justice system. So as we begin to identify priorities, where does the data take us? What are the highest priority issues that as a collective we must deal with in South Los Angeles in particular? And so I just wanted to offer that as part of the discourse, again, that it is important to be effective for the long haul, that we must be driven by data. And what does the data say? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Pat. Really appreciate it. And thanks for your work that you're doing, out there. Really appreciate it. I want to quickly lift up Tamara Hunter. This is, coupled, with the false perception of competition, right? For scarce resources. That's part of that American machinery, that they throw out there. And it's a classic conflict theory, which must also be dismantled. So you're right about that. In terms of how it's all about divide and conquer, and also this whole sense of paternalism, colorism. I mean, it's all up in there, and so we have to be very, very vigilant in understanding, how we analyze, as Pat said, using the data. Pastor Nelson, your thoughts or question?
Sure. Thank you, Pastor Sauls. Thank you, Pastor Thomas, Marta, and I'm forgetting the doctor who shared her experience growing up going to church as well, whose name that was. But
Dr. Michelle Burton.
Dr. Michelle Burton. I'm so thankful to be invited to this conversation and to be included. Really taken by the discussion. I do agree with Martha's comments that we need to restore from the soil to the soul the individuals, like the analogy, Pastor, that you framed this in, given the Jericho Road. Certainly, we need to look at it as the Jericho Road, that is South Los Angeles. And I think even given the past, the past remark, the Jericho Road had its own facts about it. And so the data or the data within South Los Angeles should guide us as we begin to develop a framework for working in the community. I want to say that I pastor a church that is less than a mile from the flashpoint of what Michelle called the LA riots. Our church is located at Manchester, not even a half block from Manchester and Normandy. And so we're within the immediate area of Florence and Normandy. And we'd like to certainly be involved in this discussion, but more so involved in the solution. The church that I pastor has been there even prior to that time. And considering that, our church wants to be a part of the solution that helps this community transition from their soil to their soul. I love that. And we're already committed to that effort as we've been working with vaccinations with you all. We're committed to that effort to feed folks in our community. And certainly we're committed to that effort to get the truth out about the Lord that loves us and loves us through the work that we do. And so if I could be of any use and resource in that community, I certainly want to be. And we're willing to work with any and everyone because we love everyone. And so thank you again, Pastor Sauls, for having me. And I guess the question that I would have is, what are next steps?
Yeah.
And how do you plan on involving the faith institutions right there in the community, on the block, if you will? And how do you want us to work with you all in this effort?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Pastor Nelson. And now I'll share a little bit about that in closing remarks so that we can, look at that. Because, as, our focus, as community health councils is in South LA, especially that Best Start region 2. And so we do, have a vision of how do we, activate, include, and involve, the faith community around the work led by the disparities, but for the most part informed by a participatory model that we've embraced around inviting, the community to have voice and share vision, around, all of that. So yes, we will do that. Pastor James, I don't know whether you have still have some of your students here. I think we would want to maybe invite any of them, to maybe share some thoughts or even a question. And whoever will do that, I will lobby for extra credit for you, from Dr. James Thomas. If any of the students, I think I would be remiss if I do not, acknowledge and amplify, the voices, of our young people, in this. So if there's any of the students, we got a spot reserved for you for a comment or a question. With the possibility to credit.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, there are students here, but it's a different class.
That's okay.
But I
That's
will
okay.
say this.
They still students.
But I wasn't almost, I was late. But I will say this, these are some wonderful students. They waited for me, even though I was in a whole nother building. But I will say this, and I asked them, one of the things that I think in terms of moving forward, in terms of the movement for liberation, is that we got to be able to engage young people. And I think that they're pretty cynical as it relates to electoral politics. Because remember, many of them only know a Black president. And many of them are learning that even under the Black president, that not much changed. And so while we're talking about the 1992 civil unrest, you know, it is also important to understand that the Black Lives Matter movement is a jewel that's been offered to society if people are willing to accept the gift, particularly the Christian church, which quite frankly, I'm very disappointed in because they have not recognized the fact that this is the only time in history, I believe, when there were people who were not Black, who decided that they wanted to center Black people for real, for real. And so I would just like to encourage that whatever is done, whatever solutions are reached, whatever decisions are made, that it be done with the understanding that today's generation of young people think quite differently than we did, and that we do. And so we have to remember that many of them don't carry the baggage that we do. And so a lot of times the way that we talk, the way that we move, the things that we do, the policies we propose are not consistent with their values. And so I would just like to lift up one last time, and then I'm going to have to go, and I apologize, that there is a values gap. And, you know, and I hate to keep driving this home in terms of Black people, but I'm Black, so I got to drive it home, is that there is a values gap, and Black people are currently the least valued on the globe. And at some point, we have to recognize that and be willing to do something about it. And so I'm excited about the fact that at this point in time, that is beginning to happen. And I'm excited about the work that I'm hearing about that everybody on this panel is doing. And so if there is in any way that it can connect with the work that we do at Cal State LA and our students, I'm sure with a little extra credit, they would love to participate. So with that said, I'm sorry that I have to go, but I've enjoyed my time, and you know me, so you know I'm always going to be there whenever you need me. So you all take care, and God bless.
Thanks, Rev. Appreciate you, man.
All right.
Invite Marta for some, just final comments, as well as Michelle, just in terms of, your sense of, where do we go in terms of just, elevating the importance of this long-term commitment, to disrupt and dismantle, because Lord knows, as we come up to this 30th anniversary, given everything else that has happened within these 30 years, we just though a resilient people, there are just, ways in which we need to, look at what progress that we need to make as it relates to systems change in South Central Los Angeles. So I'll have Michelle go first with closing remarks, and then Marta, and then I'll close us out. Michelle?
Thank you, Pastor. I'm actually willing to cede my time to Khalid if he would like to still make a comment or ask a question.
Okay, good. I may have missed Khalid. Go ahead, Khalid.
So much for that, my sister. I appreciate the opportunity. And Reverend Sauls, thank you again. Just real quickly, I just wanted to piggyback on a lot of the institutions that we were talking about may have not been at the forefront of the struggles that we've been facing in our communities. But one in particular that I've been working alongside of and with some phenomenal folks is public education. And if we as a nation, Black nation, do not fundamentally put that at the forefront of teaching our children their cultural relevance and identity, workforce development, financial literacy, it's going to be a very difficult road to toe. I just heard, comments about our youngsters not really feeling what's going on. I know a lot of these youngsters out here feel abandoned. They're reckless in their actions and in their words, and we see that. So for me, just to keep it short, we have to coalesce around public education and remove the disparities. Yeah, there's some arguments with charters versus traditional, but as a Black nation, we need to coalesce in making sure that the accountability to LAUSD is there. The money is starting to come in, it's there, and we need to make sure that we don't blow this brilliant opportunity to make sure that our youngsters get the tools necessary to deal with what we're dealing with, an attempted coup, lack of real employment out here in those middle to higher income wage jobs. So the whole light. So that's what I would like to participate in. That's what I would like to offer my assistance in, and feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks so much, Khalid. Appreciate your presence and all the work that you're doing, man. Marta, any closing remarks?
Well, you know, I want to agree with the comments that were made. I think that the South Central Rooted report was an attempt to make sure that we're rooted in the data. And what does that mean, right? And I think we've also made some other attempts to look at policy solutions and actually analyze them. Where are they on the spectrum? Are they going to get us to the transformational change? So I think we need a lot more conversation and a lot more sort of working together to come up with those solutions, because often we come up with a solution in one area that may cause another one, but also isn't actually getting to those systemic things, right? Building radical democracy that young folks can have hope in and some trust in, that the institutions that are supposed to be protecting them are actually doing that, right? And that isn't the case right now. So we have to do more education, we have to do more collaboration, and we have to do more collective of building of power. So I look forward to building with this community. You know, I've been an activist since I was 15 and, you know, going to be 62 this year, I think. And what has sustained me is this radical hope that we can actually do this. So I'm excited about this conversation and happy to keep it going. Great.
Well, thanks so much for that. Let me just thank, Michelle. Want to thank you, Marta, and James for your long-term commitment and the ongoing work that you are doing. I feel privileged to work with all three of you, in so many, different ways, around how do we continue to intentionally look for ways, to disrupt and dismantle, these drivers by way of sacred resistance, as well as a moral reimagination. And it invites all of us to be a part of it. It is a collective, effort. For us as community health councils, we do take, a liberatory path to this. And that's why, as part of Soulforce, part of it is to really, include, a liberation theology framework, in the progressive and the prophetic, ways that we will include our faith communities in South Los Angeles. Now, a lot of our faith communities have done a tremendous amount of work. Our vision is to see how we can be another stream, into, this river towards, restoration and transformation, as Marta put it, all both soil, and soul, and to see through that how we can begin to not just, respond with charity, but really to begin to analyze the data, and through that begin to ask the questions about not just equality, but equity. And that invites us then to engage in the preventative and proactive work, as it relates to policies and systems change. For us, that is a critical way in which we can re-envision and reconstruct that Jericho Road, or this Jericho Road, called, South Los Angeles. It's fine to still be good Samaritans, but, reactive will be accepted, but we all know that proactive and preventative, that's game changing. And that's how we will invite and involve, our faith communities in the work that we are doing, at community health councils. So, so thank you so much. Our next webinar will be the last week in October, And then we're gonna go deeper now into, these disparities. Pat, you mentioned the data. So we're gonna go deep in each one of them and continue to not just have thought-provoking questions, but also solutions-driven, conversations in the work that needs to be done, here in South Los Angeles. So thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate, your partnership as we continue our work together. Take care, keep the faith, and let's continue to march towards beloved community. Blessings.